Today is Wednesday, August 19th, 2026. Now, I just wanted to go over events from the past week or two and establish what the current geopolitical situation is. In terms of supremacy, I think it was in July that I said I'm going to sit here for 30 minutes and wait for the Central Intelligence Agency to test me of whether they owned their entire policies. And if they were to test me and they were to find out that they actually did not own their entire policies, the Pentagon did, in fact, just sit next to Iran for 20 years after all bits are said in Operation Stop Thief, then they didn't really own themselves, which means they would be illegitimate in the lives of ordinary citizens of people of the world. So no tests, but apparently in their mind, they think that they still have legitimacy, and I guess they really do not, because I think one would want to test something like that. So as of today, let us first think about technology, because at the start of the so-called political era in the world after the end of World War II, there were things that only the Soviets knew. There were things only the Americans knew. And really what differentiated the I guess the two nations was that they were locked in a struggle, and not necessarily for supremacy, but just say, hey, look, we don't have to listen to you. And so they were basically saying that to each other, and there were proxy battles, things like that. I think as of the year 2026 AD, it would be reasonable to assume that there are tiny nano tracking devices on every individual. Some that are actually on the bodies of the individuals, and some that are in the ears, forcibly in most cases, conned in most cases, coerced in most cases, illegal, and why they run, why the so-called white is right government run, or government members who thought they were all that, thought they were God, Jones, Jesus, why'd they run? So forced, coerced, conned, forced to listen to megalomaniacs. These people are power crazy, and you know what? At the end of the day, they ate Iraqi food, even in the end of today, okay? And they ate Venezuelan food, and they're gonna shit tomorrow, and they know that the majority of the people don't really know that, and hence the suppression. So they're basically political wussies. You know, they think they're all that, and then they got reality check real quick. And even after 20 something years of not attacking Iran and no hijackings, the war mongrels, I think it was in the year 2025 where they attacked Iran. But going back to the technology, these are just side diversions from technological realities and facts, I think. So I think it would be reasonable to say that, okay, there are nano tracking devices on the skin. So if an individual does not want to have a nano tracking device, then you have to think about, okay, well, how did that nano tracking device get on there? So it can be either through the water, it can either be through the food and, um, or the air. So there's really not really a way of getting around the food, water, and there are ways to have an enclosed self-purification air system. You can't really get around food and water. I mean, it has to be a self-enclosed, very secure system to really, and they would have to be newborns and stuff for a long time. So you can't wait 20 something years for individuals that have no nano tracking devices. So then really it is about saying, hey, okay, we've got nano tracking devices, and it's really tough to build independent technology. And the tracking devices, they could be on the face, and they could have tiny little tiny cameras. You wouldn't know really. But in terms of countering sophisticated technology, it's you would want to make sure to counter such kind of technology, imperialist technology. You just want to kind of presume that it's there. So there's really levels of countering that. So one could have an area where the signals are jammed, right? So it's okay, you have a nano tracking device on your face or on your body, and no forced hearing devices, okay, from an imperialist members of somewhat terrorist government. So now you've got to pretty much say, okay, well, the only immediate answer to that is you want to be able to jam the signal, right? Because there's no point in trying to track if the signal is blocked, right? So that means that the signal is relayed through ground stations and more likely satellites, and the packets are distributed and sent in nanoseconds or microseconds or even milliseconds, but it's sort of random. It sort of goes into the Wi-Fi, right? It goes into it piggybacks maybe, or it is embedded within another signal that appears like a normal signal, wireless signal, right? So yeah, and we don't want to go into fidelity. So Wi-Fi, that's essentially technology where the packets of data are sent through the air, and it can be embedded within an embedded signal. So you don't really know, you don't know how embedded it is, right? It can be embedded just in a single. Okay, you have a packet, it's embedded, and then another packet, and you think it's part of a single packet, right? So you can't really waste time going through really sophisticated decrypting algorithms, because we're talking quantum and we're talking nano, and so it's really going to be tough because you're being tracked, right, and 24/7. So the only real way is to block the signal, block the path, right? If you block the path, you block the signal. You have an area, let's say you have a square kilometer area, and people are in that square kilometer area. Let's say even if it's open field, steel bunker, anything, and underground, anything, in the air, airplane, anything. So if you have a square kilometer area on the ground, let's suppose, okay, smaller, there's the bunker, even smaller, there's the airplane. you pretty much have to figure out how to block the signal, how to block the path. And I think there are nations that are capable of doing that. Because once you block the path, once you block the signal, now you're relatively free in the sense that you're able to think what you want to think, you're able to implement what you want to implement, you're able to create technology in that secure square kilometer area or square mile area, right? So that's really what's really important, is because let's face it, there's people, they say that they're number one in the world, and they say that, they want to compete and blah, blah. But at the end of the day, they have these huge egos where they cannot compete honorably. For example, social media, they call it shorts, right? So, okay, if I was to put, and I never would, but I got supremacy. If I was to put, I've already established that July they didn't test, and even years before that. But if I was to put hearing devices where their daughter or their wife or their mother or their grandmother or their aunt or their cousin sister, if I was to put a hearing device where I could turn on that hearing device any given point of the day and nobody can help them, right? That CIA badge, that NSA badge, that United States government badge is going to go fly out the door, and they will follow and they will obey every single order, right? So obviously I wouldn't do that. I'm a man. I would never use innocent females and drag them into the boxing ring. But there are asswipe losers, never had a tan. They're losers, right? And they cannot compete. So they get companies to name it short, and then they con and con and con and con and lie until the public thinks that the person is independent when the public knows that they're not independent. So, and then they'll create all kinds of physical diversions. So basically, these are political wussies. They don't have the balls to test me, and yet they still, in their crazy mind, they actually think that they have a legitimate right to be in females' ears and to use them. So they are like the biggest egos, and at the same bipolar time, biggest wussies in the world. I mean, wussies with a P. The biggest wussies with a P in the world, and at the same time, the biggest egos in the world, right? So they actually cannot compete honorably. And at the same time, the individual has to win. And so basically, they want the world to pay for their many mental illnesses. Two pools. And so they cannot compete honorably, and it has to win, right? So, and that's just a fact. That's just a reality. I mean, you remember, if you're an adult and when you were young, there's always those losers that would go cry home to their mommies or their teachers and say, "Oh, he isn't letting me win." They're wussies. Point is that you just have to deal with them until they die, which fortunately I think will be soon, because I think they're in their 70s and 80s, getting near that age of where they've gone past their deluded delusions of grandeur a long time ago, and they got a reality check real quick 20 something years ago in the form of All Bits Are Set and Operation Stop Thief. Now, the question is how to deal with such people, because they are going to want to have continuity of operations, right? They're going to raise individuals that basically think that they have supremacy, and they have no qualms about innocent females and things like that, right? So they're going to be, their next generation is going to be quite frankly, bipolar also. So now, with the use of American created technology or European created technology for, I mean, groundhogs. I don't know. I mean, like people that use females. I don't know how to describe them. One simply has to think about how to counter it. And the way to counter it is that if there can be millions of nano tracking devices, let's just say, but if it can't transmit the signal to its receiver, then it's useless, right? It's useless. And really, and there's ways to jam signals too, right? So if there's a wireless signal piggybacking, or if it's embedded, then there are ways to jam it, right? And there are ways to send out false signals. And of course, there's going to be encryption methods and things like that. But basically, there has to be so much noise and there has to be so much confusion that they're going to spend more time in trying to decrypt the signal. And eventually, they're not going to get any signal. There's no signal within a certain radius or square kilometer area. That's tough, but it is something that is doable because you want to basically have an area where there's just no way that they can receive the signal. And it kind of kind of explains why political wussies with drug induced egos, delusion of grandeur, there's Starlink and things like that. So once that area is established, and you just got to think about, obviously central locations are more secure than other. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago there was a map on American news, TV news, said that they had a map of Russia, and there's a point highlighted in the center. China, same thing. India, same thing, right? And the reason why, and another thing is, you can simply overwhelm the system, right? So you can just create so much until you have that secure area where the signal is blocked. You can just overwhelm the system. You can go into Africa, you can go into Australia, you can go into Antarctica, you can go into the Arctic, you can go into Europe, you can go into Canada, you can go into pretty much anywhere where they don't have complete jurisdiction. And you could totally overwhelm the system. And it is possible because there's a billion plus people in China, a billion plus people in India. And let's face it, the people in the 1990s in America, that was the unipolar moment where their character was tested and basically failed miserably. Right? What do they do? We Are the World, not helping Africa. Barbie dolls, physically violated females in war-rich nations to recruit their military members, right? So they basically failed and failed big time, but they want to be retested as if like they can go back in time or something like that. No, they already showed their true character. And now the world basically has to resist until either they die or their thinking changes, which I doubt because they're, old kind of people are set in their ways. And the new generation, after they die, they don't have to physically answer to them. And then they can implement the policies that they want to implement. And who knows, the next generation of people might be a little more realistic and might have actual pride in not taking other people's food, right? And might not have a Calvin Klein obsession of being number one in the world and at the same time having to bribe and beg everybody in the world. So until that time happens, a strategist, intelligence strategist or military strategist has to take into account such female users and losers with a government badge in the West, right? So there can be so much noise, there can be so much confusion, there can be so much misinformation that by the time they try to figure out what is the actually going to happen, and it's too late, you know. So, for example, in 2003, I was at Nous Foods, and Iraq War had started, and I was thinking there's just no way that my tax dollars are going to support taking other people's food like that. And so eventually I established a storyline where I became interested in politics in India, and that I really wanted to learn, and I felt sad about uh, loss in my life, which I wasn't, whatever, and needed to go to India. Da, da, da. And then, once I got to India, I had to secure the flat, the apartment, I had to secure the storyline, I had to secure um, basically what I knew to be the technology at the time. So I wasn't worried about ink that had GPS signals in it where it could track what you wrote, even if you were in a basement somewhere and it was covered, or if you were in an attic somewhere and it was covered, and because the ink had nano GPS bots in it that could literally to the millimeter know its geolocation and could figure out, okay, what the shape of the letter that you're writing in based on the movement of and the differences between one geolocation to another based on the ink in the nanobots in the ink, right? That technology might, I think it is around now, 2025 after that, right? So, but it isn't. I think well, it wasn't, because otherwise they would have killed me. But so I secured what I had to secure based on what I thought was the technology at the time, and fortunately I was right. And they ran and they ran and then they ran some more, and so you have to kind of sort of have a technology mindset where the worst possible outcomes and paranoia, in the sense that you have to think of really sophisticated technology and then just sort of assume that it exists and then just sort of be able to counter it, right? So there was definitely no nano tracking cameras on skin, on the face, or this or that at in 2004 January, as well as after that. But well, that year, I mean. But going back to technology, you have to create an independent system. There's just no way around it. There's no MOUs. There's nothing you can do to actually change an imperialist mindset. And blackmail only goes so far if governments are blackmailing the United States government of not talking about their crimes of the past and running away from realities, political realities. So it's really tough. It really is. Nothing easy was achieved without a good fight. I mean, look at the Iranians, look at the Russians, right? The Chinese is sort of practical fighting, in the sense that they want independent technology, and then at the same time they don't like loud, obnoxious, intrusive, um, politically corrupted, politically dead, um, blind, no vision rapists to tell them what to do. So Chinese is sort of it's sort of, in the sense of their mindset, it's sort of Russia in the fiercely independent, and it's sort of India in the practical business. And India is like, it's like basically a medley of European mindset, American mindset, um, Japanese mindset, Korean mindset. Because if you think about like laissez-faire, right? So it's a French economic concept, basically, the market, free economy, things like that, right? And it's like it can sometimes lead to chaos. Like it can lead to hyperinflation. It can lead to prices that are you're not able to control the prices. Runaway prices, highway robbery, things like that. And so you have to have some kind of government intervention, but you have to also respect the economic foundations of capitalist nations. And so with India, it's sort of chaos in the sense that it takes a long time to bring a billion people to understand, okay, it's very important to have standards. It's very important to have quality. It's very important to have a certain way of doing things. So, for example, a long time ago, I wrote that, in India, there will be no manufacturing whatsoever, no manufacturing standards in terms of like a bouncing ball, and let's say even a tennis ball, right, or even a cricket ball. There's no, well, basically, uh, let's just even say a basketball. Okay, so if there's no manufacturing standards, the ball can be of different width, circumference. It can be different. Basically, one state or one region could have a different basketball than another, and that doesn't help nationally, and it certainly doesn't help in international competition. So before there were no manufacturing centers. Now it's getting there. So French laissez-faire, then MOUs with Japanese, Koreans, and all that. And so with India, there are a billion people that could add to the confusion, but it's it really takes a strong will. I mean, you're basically at war 24/7, and you've got to have self-correcting mechanisms in place where you don't go crazy like the crazy people who lost and then continued and pretended like as if nothing happened and continued to rape and continued to involve themselves and use females for political protection. So anyway, for the readers that don't know, a long time ago I wrote two books called All Bits Are Said in Operation Stop Thief. Well, for the viewers now, most of a lot of my a lot of my public communication is through writing, but this, in fact, is through video. So for the viewers that don't know, it is All Bits Are Set was basically a book about using a casus belli, a reason for war, to attack Iraq, which at that time was an independent sovereign nation that had control over the second largest oil reserves proven in the world. And the casus belli, it turned out in the book, the work of fiction, All Bits Are Said, was September 11th, 2001 attacks in New York City, Pentagon, Shakespeare. Now, in that, the reason why it was called All Bits Are Said is because I asked the question, what is necessary to conquer an oil-rich nation? And if you know anything about bits, binary digits, there's 001, military superiority, 010, intelligence superiority, 011, logistics, 100, domestic media, total control, 101, international media, some kind of sway, let's just say. And then 110, ROI, accounting, and then 111, the final bit, as the reason for war. And 111 is actually the number of days left in the year on September 11, 2001. And it would be reasonable to assume that at an agency where there are both extremist and moderate members, every day is important to achieve their targets, their so-called goals. However misguided some of those goals might be. Now, there's and the reality is for the adults that are like actually mature. Basically, the reality is there was a point in their life where they did not have hearing devices, right? And I can guarantee that it happened after 2004 if they were not working for the government before. So now, and there's a generation of people that have been spoon-fed lies and truths, lies to conform to their reality, and truths to uh, prevent them, the newer generation born with a hearing device, and essentially, well, after they're born, they get place the hearing device in the hospitals. The truth so that they don't think of their owners as liars. But the fact is they are liars. The fact is that Iraq had the second largest oil reserves in the world in 2003, even. And when the September 11, 2001 attacks happened, there were Americans, independent, no hearing device, that said, hey, there is no way a nation, a people, a government that already lost the first Gulf War would orchestrate or would be behind terrorism and terrorist attacks on the most secure nation in the world, because it would invite complete annihilation. And because they're oil rich, they would want to use that oil money to develop, not to commit terrorism against a nation that they already lost to. And so then the lie changed from World Trade Center attack being blamed on the Iraqis to weapons of mass destruction. And basically, the Pentagon was used to attack Iraq. And then they were next door to Iran. I wrote the book All Bits Are Said, and the Pentagon named its fighter jet carrier vehicle, and now it's it's the baseline, the truth, the reality, even to the people that were born after 2005. The reality is that these thieves could not steal oil. And the reason why oil is important is because it's basically to imperialists free money, right? So if you think about the cost, let's just think from an accounting point of view. The World Trade Center, to rebuild them, might have cost 5 billion. Commercial aircraft 2.75 billion, and there were 4 commercial aircraft that were hijacked, so let's just say that that's 11 billion. And then billion here and there, so maybe it might have cost 16 billion dollars, right? But anyone that knows history and doesn't, or I mean, I doubt its accurate numbers are online now. But I know because I was working at Nas Foods at the time. The worth of Iraq's oil in 2003, before it was attacked, was 37 trillion. So to put that into perspective, a trillion is 1,000 billion. So now it's 37,000 billion of money versus the cost of the foreign terrorist attack, which would be 16 billion. So 37,000 plus, right? Plus 37,000 in your ledger and minus 16. You have 37,000 billion and you got minus 16 billion. So obviously very profitable. It didn't work out so well in Iran when they were accused of rape of military members, female relatives, and then they basically ran away from the book, work of fiction. If it wasn't true, then why they run? And the history is there for everyone to see. No hijackings for 20 years, and no attack on an independent sovereign nation, fiercely independent. Great deal of respect for Iran. to resist whom they see as an imperial Western power that has no regard for international boundaries and no respect for women and people, independent people. So it's basically free money, right? And that money, it finances so much. It finances, for example, even now, 20 something years later, it finances data centers. It finances AI. It so much, it's free money essentially if you look at it from an imperialist viewpoint. So and they're still in Iraq, right? The American oil companies are still in Iraq. So with countering technology that is meant to suppress, and this is what, and I've asked this question a while ago, is that there's people in India, there's people in China, there's people in Europe say, oh, if we only had the chance, we would beat the United States of America. And it's like, okay, let's level out the playing field, let's even it out. And now the irony of it is, it's the West that is suppressing the East, right? Because they might know what the outcome of that competition is. And so they continuously feed themselves with free oil and finance the growth, this, that. It's not about jobs. It's not about food. It really isn't. In the sense of, um, Western nations have enough food and the technology to grow food, even if it is artificial. It's really more about free oil money. I mean, it basically, if it isn't yours and you took it, you stole it, and it's free to you, right? So basically, world thief. And then use that money and that growth to finance the suppression of other people, the illegitimate nosiness in females, and the inability to honorably compete, right? So there's a lot of mental illness there, and the white is right supremacists, racists over their own people, racists over JFK Jr. I think that looking back, I'll give another example. I'll finish it off in 40 minutes. So I think going back to, I think it was 2005. Um, I I I don't want to say that I should have been more cutthroat, but had I known that they would always be a wuss and not have any respect and use females, and maybe I would have been a little more cutthroat. So basically, what happened was I was at a dharamshala, kind of like a place where it's cheap to rent the room. And before I had an appointment with the Chinese consulate in New Delhi, India, and before I got ready and before I left the actual premises, there was all of a sudden, I had been there for a few days, but on that particular day, there's all of a sudden Ram bhajans, this and that. And yeah, at that time, and they actually were fanatically right about that particular point, is that, yeah, I did know about Jet Li, the One, and Liar Liar. So Jet Li, JT, and last name Li, and Liar Liar. And so obviously it would have revealed a lot of double agents of jet setting double liars that worked for the CIA, worked for the U.S. government, and it would be like pyramids collapsing. So essentially, there was a lot of Rambajans, and I am not even close to being Supreme Lord or whatever like that universe. But basically, they were uh, voicefully and really, really, asking me to not say that, and almost begging. But then, I was like, okay, let me be nice about it, and then kind about it, kind warrior, I guess. And then I went to the Chinese embassy. I tested them for sympathy. I didn't mention anything about Jet Li the One and Jim Carrey's Liar Liar, and a lot of narcissism in the 1990s Soul Superpower. And basically, the double agents were not revealed at that time, and they had basically begged. And now it might have been better to be more cutthroat at the time. But anyway, that's in terms of technology, in terms of geopolitics, that's the current situation as of today. I really wish the easiest thing would be just to simply, rather than go around begging the world and the people that have a lot of influence in the world, it might have been easier to just acknowledge and accept defeat. But I guess if you grow up with what is right, being spoon fed lies your entire life, then I guess it's really tough to swallow global losses. It's really tough to swallow losses. Um, but anyway, that's the geopolitical situation today in terms of technology, in terms of politics, and I wish every independent nation well.